There we go. I must have been recording right when we began talking. So I'm ready to begin, and
Perfect.
you are as well. I want to begin today with a question for all of you listening. How many of you have had strange symptoms? You weren't exactly sure it was going on and you didn't want to make a doctor's appointment. So instead, you turned to Dr. Google and you Googled your symptoms. No matter what you were searching up, you ever noticed how many times stress pops up as a precursor to the problem? And stress is often listed as one of the top things that could be causing your illness. Well, I have. I always turn to Dr. Google. I probably spent too much time on it, but I would admit that I have lived a very high stress life. When I was a journalist, I kind of felt like I was working in a pressure cooker all day. And stress, I know this to be true, it does very weird things to your body. I could go on and on. But my guest today knows it very well. She actually offers workshops to all kinds of organizations, along with one-on-one coaching on how to reduce stress. You ready for some takeaways, everybody? Get your pen and your paper out as I welcome Victoria Smith to the Inner Circle today, joining me remotely from Calgary. Victoria, I am so looking forward to this conversation today.
Carrie, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is mine because I love this topic matter because I have lived and breathed stress, and it really has affected my body in crazy ways. So I am looking forward to what you have to say today. But I'm not going to talk about me for a second. I want to talk about you and your morning. Tell me how your morning went with a 4-year-old son and what, 18-month-old daughter?
Well, today is a particularly odd day because my son is currently having dental surgery. My husband
Oh,
took him, and I knew I couldn't go because seeing he's having 8 cavities out, and they had to put him under because he's so little, and
oh,
like I knew I
goodness.
wasn't going to cope well with it.
Right.
But so instead, I had to push my daughter with a stroller through all the snow to day home. So it's been, my son woke at 5:30. It's been different, but
Right.
even as I was like pushing that stroller through the snow, I was like, it is beautiful. It is
Yes.
absolutely beautiful out
Mm-hmm.
here, even though I'm sweating buckets under my jacket.
I love that you're that honest about the situation because, yeah, it can be snowy and cold, but when you are pushing a stroller, I can relate. Been there, done that, don't have to do that
Yeah.
anymore. I want to just begin with a bit of your background instead of hopping right into it. I understand you were born in England, but
I
Calgary
was.
is home. Do you have any memories of growing up in England at all?
Oh no, we moved when I was about 2 years old, and I'm one of those people with a terrible memory. I feel like I don't remember before I was 6 years old. But we go back a lot. We go back to England and to Scotland quite frequently.
Do you really? And
Yeah.
revisit? You have probably a lot of family back there.
Yeah, we were the only ones that moved over because my dad was in oil and gas, so everyone's back home.
Okay, so tell
Yeah.
me what growing up was like for you. Where are you? Are you an only child, or what was your upbringing like?
My upbringing, I would say, was fairly traditional. My dad worked in oil and gas. My mom was a stay-at-home parent for most of her life. Into my sort of junior high, high school years, she went back to nursing. And I have a brother who's 6 years older than me, which is quite, I consider it quite the age gap because, one's in school, one's a baby. It's
Yep.
quite I wouldn't say we got close until sort of we were adults, just
Right.
we're always at different stages of life.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Yes.
was pretty traditional, did the sports, did the activities, pretty
What
normal.
was your house like? If like, was it stress free, or how did your mom manage?
My mom was pretty good. She kept a lot of, I would say they mostly both kept a lot of it under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the stressful times came with finances, right? Because in my dad working in oil and gas,
Yeah.
Calgary's a boom bust city.
You
And
got it.
I remember going from big houses to little houses to big houses to, my dad having to take a loan from my brother because we'd been given some inheritance money from an aunt
Mm-hmm.
because we were that strapped for cash. And so finances was always the big thing. But otherwise, it always seemed fine on the surface, but we later found out that was not always the case.
How old were you when you were going through those things, and did they leave lasting memories? Clearly, if you reflect back on that.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I was super cognizant of it until before I was about 12. We moved into what I would say is a fairly rich neighborhood in Calgary, and I always knew we were not on the level of everyone else that we lived with, because
Right.
one thing to be able to buy the house, it's another thing to have everything that goes with that lifestyle, which we did not. But my dad came from like a council estate in Scotland, so I think there was always a level of wanting to reach that level that everyone else was at, and
Right.
that's just not what we were. So I think there was always that trying to be something that we were not.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did a job in the line of working with stress and that sort of focus come onto your radar? How did you know that this was your calling, that you needed to do this?
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say it was ever on my radar. I had a bunch of different things I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be a diplomat, which turns out to be the worst thing I could possibly be. I'm not very diplomatic with politics, but I wanted to travel. And I wanted to work in advertising agencies. And then I ended up working in oil and gas for 5 years. That was my first major job out of university, doing communications and community investment.
Right.
Exposed me to the nonprofit world, which I absolutely adored. But as most people who work in oil and gas, or frankly anyone in Calgary really knows, like, the corporate world is great at burning you out. And I think especially when you're coming straight out of university, because you very much feel that your identity is this job. And so if you get some bad feedback, that's not feedback about your performance, that's feedback about you as an individual, right? And so with that, I had met my husband. He was living overseas at the time. We were long distance for 3 years. I was dealing with depression. There was a lot. So I burnt out very badly. And I actually got shingles twice before the age of 30.
I'm going to stop you there.
Yep.
Before I really want to dig into the shingles, but
Yeah.
I need to understand how you recognized you were burning out. Like, what were you feeling?
I don't know that I recognized it right away. I think other people recognized it, which brought it to my attention. I was canceling on friends all the time. Like, no matter what people invited me to, I always had the best intentions of going, and I almost always canceled. I was getting sick a lot. Like, whatever bug was going around in the office, I would catch. I was getting really stuck into office drama and politics, which I think was just an outlet for looking for something to feel, I don't know, a part of, but that really brings you down. And I was just tired. I was tired all the time. I could have slept, I canceled plans and then I would just sleep, and just low and frustrated all the time. And just, I honestly felt this like heaviness on me all the time.
Were
And
you eating, breathing, sleeping your job?
Mostly. Yeah, I wanted to be so good at it. I wanted to, in corporations, at least in the corporation I worked for, there's a ranking system, right? And so I wanted to be a 1. I wanted to be a high potential employee, and I ended up being that, but at the cost of my health and my well-being.
Okay, so you mentioned shingles.
Yes.
And how old were you?
Oh, I must have been 27-ish.
Victoria,
I
shingles
know.
at 27?
I know. And I didn't recognize it as shingles at all at first. My mom and I had taken a quick little break for the weekend to Victoria, BC. And I noticed this like rash forming, and I have eczema. So I was kind of like, oh, it's probably some weird like soap that I've tried or something. But then the pain started coming and everything. You get these reverberating shooting pains up and down your body on these sort of meridians, sort of horizontal and vertical, and it shot up my back, down my backside, down into my leg. Like, it would just feel like I couldn't walk very well. You try and sit and it's painful, you try and sleep and it's painful. Like, it just hurt everywhere, and just exhaustion that went with it. And I remember asking my doctor, I was like, I'm fairly certain I've seen advertisements for shingles vaccines with older white-haired people in the ads, right?
Yes.
Said, yeah, that's the way it used to be, but they're seeing more and more cases of it in people younger and younger and younger, because we are exhausting ourselves. We are burning ourselves out. And that fit my life to a T, right?
So did you have it, like what area of your body did you have it?
I had it on my butt.
Oh my gosh.
So the rash probably went from like mid back down my butt and down my leg. Um, so it wasn't the most. And so another reason, right? Like when you have this weird rash on your bum, you're like, I don't want to talk to a doctor about this.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
But so you went to the doctor and were diagnosed with shingles.
Yes.
So what was the number one thing he said to you about why you got it?
He asked a bit about my lifestyle. He's like, are you working a lot? Are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? All those kinds of things. And I may have been a little bit tearful about how stressful things have been at work. And he's like, I hate to tell you, but this is probably what it is, right? Like there's no other real reason someone your age in my like should be getting it.
That's the number one cause of shingles is stress?
For at anything kind of below the typical age bracket, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How did you feel hearing that?
It felt, I honestly felt a bit of a failure because everyone seems on the surface to be hacking it, right? To be managing their stressful jobs because you don't go home with people, right? And even your friends, I think sometimes you vent about things, but you still see your friends as like, they're great, they're amazing, they seem to be doing an amazing job. And so for me to be down with shingles and it to be such an obvious thing that you would have to tell your coworkers, I felt like a failure. I felt like I wasn't cut out for this big job.
Thank you for the vulnerability on that, because I'm sure that it's not easy to admit that. But did you finally tell your coworkers?
I mean, I had to because I had to take like 2 weeks off work.
How did they react? What did they say to you?
I think they were all quite shocked. But to be honest, a lot of them would get sick with other things because everyone was burning it at both ends.
Mm-hmm. So you took 2 weeks off of work, and then what?
And then, well, so I would like to say I took 2 full weeks off work, but given who I was,
right?
I maybe took a few days, and then the rest was like from my laptop on the couch, on the bed, trying to do as much as I could, trying to be productive, trying to contribute.
Oh, Victoria, why? Why didn't you give yourself permission?
Because we don't, right? We, especially I think when you're younger, especially when you're trying to prove yourself in your first job, you don't want to let a team down either, right? Like, because it was that feeling of, well, if I take 2 weeks off, my work goes on to someone else's plate. And in hindsight, 100%, and I would say this to anyone else, though, that's the thing, right? We would say it to any of our friends, take the time, rest.
Yes.
We don't say it to ourselves. And so I've been better at that. But then I would say it's probably about 1.5 years between the first bout of shingles and the second bout of shingles.
Oh, okay. Well, whoa.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay. So 2014 was when you got the first bout.
Yeah.
Okay. But so is shingles autoimmune? Like, can you be cured of it?
No. It's a virus, basically.
It's a virus.
Yeah. So you can
basically for life?
Yeah, it can just flare up, go down, flare up, go down. I mean, ideally, you're not living a stressful enough life that it continues to happen. Ideally. So
it's not like you can take drugs or something?
They'll give you, if you catch it on like the very first day, they'll give you like an antibiotic essentially, or the shingles vaccine, sorry. Okay. And that will make, you'll still have it, but it won't be anywhere near as painful, which is, I caught it the second time, so it wasn't as painful round 2.
Okay, so when you went back to work after 2 weeks, were you better?
I wasn't emotionally better. I was physically better. Okay. But I hadn't learned the lesson of, am I taking on too much? Like I would say maybe I like had a bit of a slower entry into work, and then I very quickly got back to where I was going, partly because my husband and I had planned to take a 3-month backpacking trip in Southeast Asia. Okay. And so I was taking a leave of absence. No one was covering my job. And so I had said to my boss, in order for this to happen, for me to take this time, like I'll work ahead, I'll get everything done so it doesn't hit anyone else. And so I basically crammed another 3 months of work into a 6-month time frame.
Isn't that interesting that we do that to ourselves?
Yeah.
That it's like, you should never have been fearful of losing your job because that was your job.
But I mean, to take a 3-month vacation, essentially, people don't look kindly on that.
Okay, so that's what was coming. And you said then a second round 2 years later. So we're in 2016. And I
Yep.
understand that you were pregnant at the time.
Yeah, so it was 2015. It was about a year and a
Okay.
half, kind of beginning to end. It was about September 2015. My parents were getting divorced after some 37 years together. There were layoffs in oil and gas coming. And yeah, I was pregnant with my first kid. So it's kind of like the holy trifecta of
Holy
stressful
man.
scenarios, and my body couldn't cope. But I did recognize it earlier and caught it early. And quite frankly, I took I ended up going on maternity leave about 6-7 weeks before my baby
Hmm.
was born, to just give myself the rest that I needed.
But how was the second time around different? Because you're an adult dealing with parental divorce. What was that like?
It was brutal. It was it was absolutely brutal, and I knew if anything was going to make me cry this call, that would be it. Um, I didn't see it coming. My parents always like bickered, right? And I kind of saw that as normal because most parents that I knew bickered of my friends and all that. I mean, to be honest, a lot of my friends had divorced parents. But I had always told myself how romantic my parents' story was, of how they met one week, they met, and then one week
Mm-mm.
later they were engaged and they've been married for 30 plus years. And isn't that incredible?
Right.
And it was the day after my third wedding anniversary. My husband and I had been on a great anniversary date. And then the next morning, my dad called me and he said, I have to come over. And I was like, I really just want to sleep. I'm pregnant. I'm tired. Can I just?
Yes.
And he's like, no, I have to talk to you. And he told me that my parents were getting separated. The challenge was I didn't get the whole story. We
What do you
later,
mean by that?
I mean, my dad at the time told me that it was kind of mutual. And then I was the one sick 3 months later to find out that my dad had been cheating on my mom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I remember vividly because we were at a gas station. It was during this epic downpour in Calgary, like hailstones coming down. And I see him texting this person, and it was someone that we had both worked with because we worked at the same company. And these were not the kind of texts. Anyways, and he didn't have the courage to tell my mom, so I had to tell my mom.
Oh
And
gosh.
so it was a really brutal. I didn't have a great first few years with with them getting divorced, for sure.
Well, and that's why I asked the question, because as an adult, we
Yeah.
process things differently. And especially since you're dealing with an affair and then having to tell your mom,
Yeah.
like that must have been crushing to you. How did you find the words?
Through a lot of tears. And I mean, I had my brother throughout, which was great, but I was talking to him about it and what had happened, and we both agreed my mom needed to know. And my brother very kindly offered to be the messenger, but I, just explained I couldn't. I had to be the one to do that, given that. Anyways, yeah.
So you told your mom, and then from there, what happened to you? And you said you went on mat leave as you're
Yeah.
processing all of this early, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing I felt terrible for my mom. But on a personal note, I felt like I was losing out all these things I had envisioned. So what I mean by that is my brother is 6 years older. He has two daughters. And I remember the family dinner that we had where they announced that they were pregnant and everyone was there. I remember the
Mhm.
family Christmases with my nieces running around and everyone together. And it seemed great, at least from my perspective. And, that was the house I got married at. And so it was all just I felt like I was losing this
A part
vision
of,
of my family
right,
and all
right.
the experiences I had hoped to have for my kids. I had hoped to see my kids running around that big garden, and yeah,
And it didn't happen that way. So
no.
that stress manifested itself in your body in a huge way.
Oh yeah. And I mean, as an adult child of divorce, you deal with very different things than when children are going through divorce. Like, you are told things that you really shouldn't know. You are told about affairs. You are told about sexual histories and all this kind of stuff that, like, you are confided in, you are vented at about the other parent or whatnot. You are put in the middle of these situations. And no matter how much you kind of try and say, I'm still the child, even though I'm 29 or 30 or whatever I was at the time, these adults going through their pain don't recognize you as a child anymore. So,
and is that how you felt?
It's how I felt, but it's also really, like, I did a lot of research at the time because I was kind of like grasping at straws, like, give me any, like, I'll take the book, I'll read the research, whatever it is. And most adult children of divorce go through the exact same thing. They are put in the middle, very much so. They are not shielded from anything. And that's hard.
It really is. And I appreciate you going there, because I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission to feel that way when we're older. It's like, well, we're older now.
Yeah.
We should be able to process those things. But essentially, your entire normal and all your dreams were disrupted with that news.
And I got that a lot from people of like, aren't you kind of like, you're an adult, you're fine. Like, it's not you going through this. And I'm like, but it is. And especially even some of my friends who parents have been divorced when they were kids, they're like, it's not that big a deal. Like, they're going their separate ways. And I'm like, but I have almost 30 years of thinking my life was one way. And it's not.
Yeah. So what happened from that point on? So they decided to separate. You're pregnant with your first baby, and the shingles comes back. So tell me about the stress level and how you coped with all of it.
I wouldn't say I coped super well. I would say I ate a lot of food. Partly I was like, I'm having a baby. I'm allowed to feel this, and I'm stressed and all the things. I cried a lot. The shower is my like go-to place to cry because I feel like I can just like let it out and do whatever. My husband was a champ through it all, like, to be honest. But I wasn't able to do some of the things that I would have maybe turned to for stress reduction in the past, like going for a run or, quite frankly, having a drink or something like that. I wasn't able to turn to those things. And so I really engaged in my counseling services. And I mean, I think I just cried through most of them. But then when my son was born, it was like a whole new whack of things going on. And I quite quickly was dealing with postpartum depression as well as a colicky child. So
wow,
that
is like the perfect storm going on. What happened with the shingles? Like, how long did they last during your pregnancy? And is that something you can pass on to your son?
No, you can't. You can't pass it on because I caught it so early, because I knew what it was, like, because the rash came back in the same spot, and I'm like, I know what this is. When you're pregnant, they just tell you to go to the maternity ward, even if you break your arm. And I remember getting like shuffled into this room that was clearly like a storage room that they'd added a bed into because they didn't want me around any of the pregnant women. And I was able to get the vaccine. The vaccine doesn't harm the baby, and so I had the rash, but it wasn't anywhere near as painful as it had been the first time.
So you're managing that. You have your son, postpartum depression. How did work or a return to work even fit into what was going on in your life and your vision for you?
Well, about 4 weeks, not even that, like 3 weeks after my son was born, I was invited to come to work because they were going to be showing us what the new org chart was going to look like and how our team's roles were going to look like. And I could tell that my role was being merged with another one. And I knew I had seniority over the other person, and I knew I had good work, and I knew my boss loved me, and I knew I would, maybe I'm very cocky about this, but I was fairly certain that I was going to get it. But I quite honestly went into her office afterwards. It was only 3 weeks postpartum, so it's probably not a conversation I should have been having with her. But I said to her, I was like, please give me the package. Like, I don't want to come back to doing 2 jobs with a 1-year-old. And my dad worked at the same company, right? Like, I didn't want to be there either for that reason. So I said, did you not have a good relationship then with your dad after everything happened? It was tense for a couple years, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, the woman that he cheated on my mom worked at the same company. It was like the holy trifecta of garbage.
Yes, yeah.
So I asked for the package and I was laid off. They couldn't lay me off until the end of my maternity leave.
Right, yeah.
But my supervisor, lovely woman, she was just like, we'll give you what you want. So
How did that feel for you?
it was a relief in some ways, and in others, it was great money, but in other ways, it was like, now I have to figure out what my next job is. And I've not had another, like, that was my first job out of university, right? 5 years at the same company. And
Right.
so there was I had this underlying tension throughout my mat leave of like, okay, what's the next role? How am I going to get it? And I ended up cutting my maternity leave short so that I could find a role.
And what was that role?
I actually ended up I had so benefited from counseling services, and I had gotten onto my own sort of wellness recovery journey that I ended up getting a position with the Calgary Counseling Center. And to this day, I love the work that they do. It was absolutely an incredible place to work. They're very research-based. I really enjoyed it. And then I was offered a position at another nonprofit who I truly, truly adored. So that became the next step. So.
And so from there, when was the idea, because I know you host a podcast as well, and it's called Girl Tries Life, which I love. Where did that idea or that name come from?
I honestly, partly it's the name of my fiction book that one day I will have published out in the world. Who knows when that will be.
I love it. Okay.
But I also just feel that for me, and even going through these hard times, the most important thing is to always try. I may not succeed. I might make a go down in a spectacular fire, but I have tried. And it's what I try and teach my son all the time. So and the girl part, I get a lot of flack for that from people of like, well, you're a woman. And I was like, but I always kind of feel like a kid in some ways on the inside and young, and like that imposter syndrome, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So just while we're on the topic of your podcast, tell me about what your focus is.
It's shifted a bit over time, but it's about giving women tangible resources to live their best lives. And so I do that by alternating between coaching episodes, which are like 5 to 10 minutes, and interviews with all these badass women, yourself shortly to be included, who have overcome struggles or have started businesses or have these fascinating points of view. I'm fascinated by other women who are killing it.
Feelings are mutual. I'm the same on that regard. So speaking of killing it, when did you decide to start offering workshops? Is this an entrepreneurial venture that deals solely with stress? So tell me about that, where that idea was born and what you're up to now.
So it was a bit of a process in the making. When I was with when I was laid off with Chevron, oil and gas company, I remember feeling that I wanted some control of my destiny going forward, and that any company at any point could lay me off. And I saw so many people who didn't have a backup, and I wanted a backup that I had control over. And I also had kind of thought, maybe I want to be a counselor. I've so benefited from this myself, but I didn't want to take on people's deep darks that way.
Yes.
And so coaching seemed a really great option to me because it's so action oriented. It's not about the past and processing necessarily what you've been through. It's about where do you want to go and what are the steps to get there.
Right.
And you still do a little bit of processing the past, but not in the same kind of depth. And so I started training for that while I was finishing my mat leave with my son. It was a really great outlet. It was really great for personal processing as well. And then over the next couple of years, I, got my certification. I started taking some practice clients, and, everyone says niche down, right? Niche down. Cause like life coach, people are like, oh, what is that? Like, I mean, a lot of people have a bit of a stigma against it. And I noticed that with every practice client I had, no matter if they were dealing with relationship issues, with problems at work, with their weight or whatever it was, it all came down to it was stressing them out and it was causing them anxiety. And I noticed that I was ending up giving a lot of the same tools to people regardless of what they were going through. So, and then I was like, to be honest, you've been a stress ball. You're a recovering stressaholic. Like, it felt like the most authentic fit for me.
So now you offer workshops to corporate clients, to not-for-profit clients on how to reduce stress. How is that going?
It's going really well. They're really well received. The one thing I would say is that I think the challenge with workshops is it's great for me to come in for a day and give you all these tools, but I say this with my clients anyways. If you want lasting stress reduction, it takes time and energy and dedication. Like we've all been to a great conference, say, where we come and we're inspired and it's amazing. And then we go back to our desk and we do the exact same thing. So it's the same with my workshop. I will give you some really great tools, some resources, but if you want to see lasting change, you've got to put in the work outside of that.
So Victoria, can we dig into that work? Would you mind sharing some of your top tips? What is it? Your most popular workshop is the 5 strategies to decrease your stress. Can you talk about those and give us some tangibles today and what we need to be doing?
Yeah, so a few things. One of the first things I would say is the reason I call it 5 strategies to immediately reduce your stress is because I think if you're operating at the level that I used to, where you're up here and you're overwhelmed and you feel like you can't come up for air, until you take off that, like skimming the top layer off, we're not even going to be able to go into the lasting stress reduction. So we need to work on that top layer first.
So by top layer, you mean what?
So so if you're feeling massively overwhelmed, there's a few things that I suggest. So first of all, I ask people to sort of write down what are 5 things you can control today. And when we are feeling so stressed, we're feeling out of control. We're feeling out of balance. And so to give you back some of that power, feel empowered, have that control. When you think about what you can control, there's actually quite a lot. I do have a mentor whose business a few years ago was on literal fire. And she talks about having done a similar strategy. And it's like, well, she could control asking for help. She could control having friends bring her healthy food so she wasn't eating junk that would just make her more amped up. She could control going to bed and handing over a shift to someone else. Like there's a lot that we actually can control. So like say today, for example, I can't control what time I get up because my son makes that decision for us pretty much, but I can control how I talk to him for the most part. And if I choose to like go to like a default zone of anger or frustration, or if I choose to try and remain calm and keep a calm voice and as a result get better behavior from him, I can choose to stay hydrated. I can choose to eat healthy food. I can choose to move my body today, even if it's pushing the stroller through crazy amounts of snow. And I can choose to ask for help. Like I asked my husband to take the day off work to take our son to dental surgery today because I knew I knew I would cry. So
recognizing those things that are within our control. That's
and either writing them down or saying it out loud. Because it's one thing, our brain is like a hamster wheel. There's real power in writing it down and saying it out loud because it makes it more concrete and it makes it more real. So I would definitely recommend doing that.
Okay.
There's this great breathing technique called the release meditation technique. Have you ever heard of it?
No. Tell me more.
It was developed by Brendan Burchard, who's a high performance coach. And essentially, when we are in stressful scenarios, most of us are breathing really shallow in our throat. And as a result, that means we're operating from like the bottom of our head, the bottom of our brain, like the reptilian brain.
Okay.
What we need to do is activate the problem-solving part of our brain. So to do that, you need to get oxygen up there. And so it all comes through taking deep belly breaths so that you're really getting that oxygen through you. So the way the release meditation technique works is that you picture, maybe for whoever's listening, you picture a recent stressful scenario, say. You got cut off in traffic, whatever it is. Picture it in your mind and you start to take deep, big breaths. And on the exhale, you say, release. Picture Serenity Now from Seinfeld. So you inhale and you release and you visualize sort of pushing away that stressful scenario, not saying it never happened, but just sort of setting it aside. You do that for about a minute and a half, however much time you have to get that oxygen to your brain. And then the critical part is you set an intention for how you want to show up for your next activity. So say I've been like yesterday, I got stuck in the snow driving my kids home from day home. And you take a couple minutes or a minute, whatever you have, take that deep breath and set the intention for your next activity. So I want to show up as the best parent for my kids. I want to show up as a listening partner for my spouse. I want to, whatever it is. And you do this at work, you can do this at home. Adapt it for your environment. I often say, saying the word release out loud is a bit weird in bathroom stall, but like otherwise, like if you have to say it in your head, do, but like you get so much benefit from doing it out loud.
Love it.
And Brendan Burchard does this for every activity he does, like going from emails to presentations to, a phone call. Like he does it all day long.
So it can easily be developed into a habit.
Yeah, absolutely a habit. But I don't know about you, but I don't have time to do that all day long. But so I very much adapt it to, when am I feeling that tension rising? When am I feeling that tightness in my throat, my back tensing up?
Yeah.
And I really use it in those moments, because you almost always, even when my children are screaming, I can go to the bathroom for 1 minute of silence, as long as the baby is in the high chair.
Got it. Yeah.
Right.
Good perspective. Keep going. What's the next one?
Boundaries are a big one. Pretty much every client that I talk to has struggles with boundaries in one way or another. So people crossing the line that you feel comfortable with, whether it's in how they treat you, how they talk to you, how they engage with you, the work that they give you, all of that kind of stuff. So picture whoever is the most frustrating person in your life right now that you have to deal with on a semi-regular basis, and ask yourself, how can you reconstruct this boundary, because it probably is just not existing, to make you comfortable. And so you often have to start by asking yourself, what are you willing to put up with? And I say that language specifically. I know people say that sounds really negative, like, well, I shouldn't be willing to put up with any garbage because like I'm amazing. And we are all amazing, but that's not life, right? Like we all have we all have frustrating family members that we see at the holidays or whatever.
Well, and what I was going to say, even the exercise itself could be stressful, because to try and think about how you're going to put up that boundaries is like, oh God, what do I say? How do I deal with this person? That's stressful.
Well, and so then you have to, start small, right? Don't start with the biggest issue you have with them. Start with like, what's one little thing that they do that irritates me that I could start to rejig? And then you build up, you build up, you build up. So ask yourself what you're willing to put up with. Ask yourself what the outcome is that you want. And then frame it as, this is the sort of behavior I need in as polite a way as possible. If that doesn't happen, this is the consequence. So I have a challenging father-in-law who will not listen to this. And, I had to, we've had to put in some boundaries of like, we don't want to be judged on our parenting. So if that's going to continue to happen, I'm going to have to leave the room because it gets me a little feisty. And so when that's happened, I have left the room. And it doesn't mean that the person necessarily learns the lesson or any of that, but it's about how you care for yourself in that moment, because you can only control you.
That's it. That's totally true. I love it. This is great. Okay, you have one more, right? Or is there two more?
Decision fatigue is a big one. We make, based on brain imaging, we make about 35,000 decisions in a day.
What?
Yeah. But we don't feel like they're decisions because most of them are habits, right? Like you choosing which shoe you're putting on first is a decision, but you probably put the same shoe on every day, right? Like order of all that kind of stuff.
Sometimes, but then I always change like three. Maybe it's this shoe or maybe it's that shoe.
There you go. You're making a lot of decisions. And so most of us will get to a point in the day where you're like, I can't make another decision. Like I'm just spent.
Yeah.
And that's decision fatigue. We have too much going through our brain. We have too much input.
Yeah,
and
but what the heck do we do with that?
You got to create some systems in your life. So whether that at home, what am I going to wear this week? You can like outline the 5 outfits for the week, and you can still decide on the day which one you're going to wear, but at least those are 5 that you've decided for the week. Meal planning, right? That's something that we do that is decision fatigue. Planning your calendar out with your partner or whoever is in your life that is helping you out with childcare, cleaning, or anything like that.
I do that. We do that all the time. Sundays is our day to do that. Okay.
But imagine how stressed you would feel if you didn't do that. Because
it's overwhelming.
We can mostly deal with what we know is coming. It's the unexpected that throws us into real tension and anxiety.
Yes.
And then at work, like what are the systems you can put into place? Email is a big one in terms of decision fatigue. If you are constantly in your inbox, you are having to make decision after decision after decision as to how important someone's issue is right now. Am I going to deal with it right now? Am I going to delegate it right now? Whereas if you can schedule blocks in your calendar for your emails, you've taken a lot of those decisions off your plate and dedicated them to one time frame.
Okay.
And
That's great.
And the same with like meetings at work. Like, I don't know how many meetings I've been to where there wasn't an agenda. So it just kind of like meandered and you didn't know who was actually responsible for what at the end of it. Like indecision is another part of that decision fatigue. So ending up with like starting with a clear plan and ending with clear deliverables is huge for your mental health.
So this is great. Was there one more? This is coming up on 5, right?
Oh,
have we hit all the top 5?
No, I know there's one more and it's just not coming to me because I have mom brain. That's
okay. But out of all of that, what do you see as the most common stressor in everything that you deal with?
Boundaries. Yeah.
Boundaries. Okay.
Yeah, and that can be boundaries with ourselves. Okay. And what I mean by that is I know that if I spend a lot of time on Twitter today under hashtag ABLEG, I'm going to get stressed out looking at the state of our politics.
Okay.
So I have to set a personal boundary around like protecting myself and, putting screen time limits or app limits or all that kind of stuff, because I'm doing myself self-harm through that.
Okay, Victoria, I'm going to challenge you here because this is, you just opened the door and I wanted to go there because for me, social media and for a lot of people is the biggest energy vampire and makes me nuts.
Yes.
But so many people, we live and breathe there. Yeah. And so I just, some days I'll log on to Instagram and I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah. I can't take one more filter, one more altered picture, one more warped view of what reality really is. And it stresses me out and I get angry. Yeah. So help, coach.
So a few things. You have to be very selective, and you are creating this feed. You are opting into who you are following and what you are seeing. So you have to cull the things you don't want to see, or at the very least mute them so that you can still be friends with those people, but not have to see the things that you know are going to infuriate you. And I have done that. I've done a mass mute on a lot of accounts that frustrate me. Okay. You also have to set limits, right? You can do that through the screen time app function. You can do that through, there's other apps for Androids that you can limit your screen time usage. So once you've had 20 minutes on Instagram in a day or whatever it is, it pops up and said you've used that amount for the day. You've got to put barriers in your place to spend less time in it. And if you can't, so I'm an entrepreneur. A lot of us have to use social media as a marketing tool. Use it like a professional, right? Like a professional marketer is going to spend certain amounts of time on it during a day. They're not going to hopefully be constantly scrolling and checking it. So be purposeful and intentional when you're going on it of this is why I'm going on. Even for personal, I am going on today to find out how so-and-so is doing, or I want to see whose birthday it is so I can, give them a, hey, happy birthday.
Yes, but for those of us whose businesses exist online,
you've got to set intentional timeframes that you do it. You can use apps like Planoly to schedule out your content, so you're not having to be in the actual Facebook or Instagram app as much. And if you've got team members, delegate some of this to them as well if you can, because for you, you're the business owner, so it feels very personal, right? If you're delegating it to a team member, yes, they work for you and they love you, but it's not as personal to them as it will be to you.
Yeah, some great takeaways there. I want to close with this because your red flag. I mean, there was a number of them when your stress limit had got out of control. Was the shingles? It was hello, Victoria, I'm shingles. Meet me, and if you don't get control of your life, I'm going to be everywhere in your body.
Yeah.
What are some of the obvious red flags that stress is really, really taking a toll on the body that you have noticed that all of us need to be aware of?
So there's a few for the body and for sort of how you're showing up in the life. So the body, tension, feeling constant aches and pains, headaches related to that, nervous stomach a lot. IBS can be very related to stress. If you're feeling a lot of that, grinding your teeth at night, not sleeping well can be a big thing. So those are a lot of things that we will probably try and find any other reason for, or we will go for a massage and say it's all okay. But try and see those as the warning signs that they are.
Okay.
On the sort of more emotional, how you're showing up side, canceling on people, feeling low, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling like just that vibrating, I can't come up for air, it's too much. I hear that from people all the time. I'm just so busy. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. How often have you said that in the last week? And is that right for you, right?
Powerful. The number one takeaway you want my listeners to remember from this podcast.
You are in charge of your relationship to stress. You really are. And I know it doesn't feel like that. I actually just finished a 12-week program with a client who started off, she's high flying, legal career, all this kind of stuff. And she said, this is in my DNA, Victoria. She's like, I am just a high stress person. Cut to the end of 12 weeks. And she's like, okay, what I have realized is it's my default, but it's not how I have to live my life. And I have so much more power over this than I realized. And that is the most important thing to remember. You are in charge of it, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. It just takes time.
You are brilliant in what you're doing. I really congratulate you that you've developed a business around this, and it's needed. I see it everywhere. I've lived it, and I had to take my own steps to get it under control. But I appreciate this conversation. It's filled with takeaways and rich with advice. So, Victoria, congratulations on everything you're doing. And for those people looking for you, where can they find you and your podcast?
They can find my website, stresslessladies.com. I'm mostly on Instagram at stresslessladies, and the podcast is called Girl Tries Life.
Victoria, thank you so much for stepping into the inner circle and the takeaways that you offered my audience. It's been a true pleasure having this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And there you
Great.